It is almost fall here on the homestead, which means that we are in the swing of school. I am toting around a baby, working around a lot of kids, and the homemaking tasks continue on. Join me as I share with you just a regular day doing all of my homemaking stuff as a mom of 8. This day starts the day before as I prepare bread dough. I try to get in a regular routine of making sourdough bread so that we always have it for not only sandwiches, grilled cheeses, side dishes, toast in the morning, makes eggs taste so much better, but also I like to keep it for my breadcrumbs, my croutons. It is never a bad thing to have sourdough bread in the kitchen. We all really appreciate it whenever we do. Now, the recipe that I share on here all the time, I go to it again and again just because it's so easy and I just have it memorized and it requires no extra thought. I can throw it together really fast even on a busy day, which, let's face it, every day around here is a busy day. As homeschooling parents, and we own a dairy cow and chickens and all of the homesteading tasks and all the constant homemaking things that don't stop, like laundry and dishes, it's good to have something that you don't have to think about. If you want to check that recipe out, it's over on the blog farmhouseonboone.com, but essentially I use a combination of all-purpose flour, bread flour, whole wheat flour. I add the water, let it auto-lyse for a little bit, which just means allowing all the flour to soak up the water, then add in my starter and salt, and then begin a series of stretch and folds. I usually just set my timer for about every 20 minutes, and then after 6 of those-ish, sometimes I only do 3, I let it bulk ferment throughout the day, and then before bed, I divide it, shape it, put it in my bannetons, and put it in the refrigerator, and then it's ready to bake the next day. So the next day, I preheat the oven so that I can bake breakfast, and then also after that, I put my Dutch oven in there to bake the bread. So this is a day that the oven's on a lot. I do this through the summer too, even though it does heat up the house, but it's nice now that it's starting to get a little bit cooler that you don't feel as guilty, at least for turning on the oven, or as hot. It gets a little bit sweaty in our kitchen, but there's certain things that make my life easier, and bread and breakfast bakes are a couple of them. Breakfast bakes are also a really good way for us to use up a lot of the stuff we grew in our garden. So we grew onions, peppers, tomatoes. The tomatoes are already dwindling down. I think we let our plants just get out of control, but we have a crazy number of peppers and onions, and this is a really good way to get them in our diet without anybody protesting, especially when you add sausage. So I'm cooking sausage in the cast iron skillet and then chopping up some bell peppers, some banana peppers. Some of these peppers are kind of spicy, but whenever I put them in small amounts in dishes, nobody seems to notice. And then I do have a tomato that we can throw in there as well. I really like getting things going while everybody is outside doing chores, so that after the milking chores are done and the eggs and all the things that we do, I'll explain that in a minute, we can come in for a nice hot breakfast as we start our homeschool. So Luke brought in the milk. He is in charge of the milking now. I was doing it all the way up until I had Victor, but usually whenever I have a new baby, we get out of the routine of that, and then it just becomes Luke's job, and then I don't get back out there. Not that I'm necessarily against it, but it's one of those things like, well, what am I going to do with the baby? So we just don't. But I have done it since Victor's been born. There's been a few instances where I've needed to milk the cow because Luke had something else going on. And I can either bring out one of my older kids to help hold him, or put him in a stroller or a wagon, put a blanket or a pack and play. There's a lot of ways, but it's just a lot easier. Thankfully, Luke's home. I can let him do that. So I strain the milk and then date it. Now, we do keep our markers in the refrigerator. A friend of mine came over somewhat recently and was like, wait, what's the special reason for keeping markers in the fridge? You'd think maybe it keeps the ink better. No, it doesn't. It's just a place where I know where it is and I can quickly label the milk, because that's the only reason we use dry erase markers. Now, when you live on a homestead, you have to first crack eggs into a bowl before putting them in the main bowl. The reason for this is we have so many chickens. A lot of them are free range. So we will find egg piles, who knows when, how long after they've laid them. For the most part, this is totally fine, especially if they're up in the barn and somewhere where the special coating that's on an egg that keeps it fresh longer isn't wiped or washed off by rain or something else. But every once in a while, you will put an egg in the basket that might be a little past its prime. So we like to inspect each egg before throwing it in a dish. We've made the mistake before of having all of these vegetables cut or 10 other eggs and then throwing in that one bad egg. And you just hate to do that. That's not something you want to happen. It's quite disgusting. And then also you waste a lot of ingredients. So for this egg bake, I am doing, I think about a dozen eggs, lots of milk, peppers, onions, tomatoes, and sausage. I'm also adding in some of my homemade cheese. So I've been sharing on here that I started making cheese in April, and a lot of it has had a chance to age. Some of the wheels have been absolutely delicious, almost cheddar tasting, and then some, even though they're the same recipe, not so good. I think I figured out what my problem is, but this happens to be a good one. It's a cumin spiced Gouda, and it aged for about 3 months. Whenever I got the wheel out and opened it, Luke stood there and shredded the entire thing up. So now I have a lot of shredded cheese. So I'm just trying to use it in various ways. I'm not sure I necessarily meant to shred it all up, but it's totally great because it makes it really easy to use. I never have to get out the shredder. I think that was his thing. Like, well, if we're getting the shredder out, getting it dirty, I might as well shred all of this cheese. So now I'm getting through this massive bowl, and then we also have another bowl in the fridge, and I'm trying to use the cheese in as many places as possible. At this time of the day, we are spread out in a lot of places. I think when Luke and I sit down and plan how the fall and the school year is going to go, we imagine it one way and then it kind of ends up another because you forget about all the variables that happen throughout the season. So, for example, right now we're still in gardening season, even though we have school time going as well. And then you forget about all the various chores and I don't know, you have this tidy plan, but then it never looks quite so tidy. So usually around, when I say usually so loosely, because whenever it's winter and it's not warm outside, it's so much different. But I guess I'll say right now, we aren't all sitting down at the exact same time doing school. So we'll have some kids doing chores, some on their math on the computer, and then we'll switch that out. And then I'll sit down with another child and read while Luke does math with another kid. And we just work on getting it all done. I do feel like, and this is probably that fallacy of our brains where we're like, it's going to be different just around the corner. But I do feel like whenever it's cold in winter, we make an effort to get in the house sooner just due to discomfort. Like nobody wants to linger outside, play with their pony, push their brother around in the stroller, play in the sand pile, and then we do a more organized school time as opposed to just like checking things off the list with school all throughout the morning and the day. But then again, will it be like that? I don't know. We'll see. But I know that in this season right now, the older kids know what they need to get done. The younger kids need special guidance from me and Luke. And we fit that in just throughout the day whenever we can. And that's when there's not other things. Like this year, we joined a co-op. So on every other Friday, we will be at our co-op for the entire day for all the kids. And that'll just be me. Luke will be home catching up on farm chores whenever no kids are here. And then also there's a few outside activities. So my girls have music lessons. And then a couple of the boys are in this nature class that we're going to. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But right now it might look like we're kind of all everywhere. And that is true, but we do have a list of objectives on each day and do our best to get those done whenever they might happen. We switch kids around, so sometimes I'll have a couple of the younger ones while reading with one of the older kids, and then maybe while I'm preparing lunch, Luke will have a few outside. And this, in a lot of ways, is how family life looks when you have such a broad age range. So we have this fall, our oldest is turning 15, and then all the way down to the baby who is 6 weeks old. So obviously there's a range of interests and abilities, and we're just trying to accommodate all that. It's never so neat and tidy, but this is the kind of homeschool I really wanted to create. I wanted to create learning opportunities that just happen right alongside real life. Since the bread recipe that I make on a regular basis creates 2 loaves, I am now working on getting the second loaf in the oven. I like to do this just back to back so that I don't have to turn off the oven and preheat the cast iron Dutch oven. But if you want the bread fresh and hot, I've also just left it in the fridge for an additional day or so that you can have fresh bread 2 days in a row from making it on one day. I am going to keep lunch really simple today for the most part, and I'm sure there are exceptions to this. I make one big meal a day, and then we either have enough for leftovers for another meal, either the next day's lunch or dinner if it was the lunch meal. But I'll make something kind of easy for the other meal if that isn't the case. And on this particular day, I have fresh homemade bread, and then I also have all that cheese that's shredded in the fridge. I'm kind of trying to get this big bowl out of the fridge. You know, it takes up space. So I'm going to be making cumin grilled cheeses with my bread and my cheese. Because it's shredded, the way that I'm doing this, since it's obviously not an easy slice to put on the bread, I am dropping the shreds onto the bread and then covering it with a lid so that it can melt. And then between the two slices, before, sandwiching together the pieces of bread with the melted shredded cheese, I can put tomatoes. One of my kids requested an egg and salami, so I did that for her. But for most of them, they are just plain grilled cheeses. The kids requested that as opposed to the tomatoes. But Luke and I, of course, love the addition of that fresh tomato. One of my tricks for cutting sourdough bread, because it can be kind of a challenge, is cutting it right down the middle and then doing half slices. Giving it that flat surface on the bottom to set it up and then cut helps the slices to be more even, more workable. Since they're kind of large towards the middle, it's hard to get your knife straight through it. So oftentimes for sandwiches, that is my approach for slicing. Now, in the spirit of trying to stay on top of my bread making so that we always have bread in the afternoon or mid-morning or whenever you can get to it, I try to get another batch going. So I'm just adding the flours. Yesterday I had a little bit of whole grain wheat already ground up, but today I have to make it fresh because I used it all for today's bread, and water to the bowl to get that process started. I love that with sourdough, you can kind of start it whenever. I know the timing can sound a little bit tricky, but the truth is that you can add the flour and water to the bowl and then 2 hours later add in the starter and the salt for the next stage. Even though you're supposed to let it sit and soak up all the water for 30 minutes, it can be longer than that. You're supposed to stretch and fold every 20 or 30 minutes. But, like today, I got a batch of bread going. Then I had a podcast in the afternoon. So I stretched and folded it 20 minutes after I mixed in the starter. But then it was another hour and a half before I got to the second stretch and fold. All of these things are very flexible in your kitchen. You don't have to be married to this time schedule that's going to keep you in the kitchen doing only this all day. Like I mentioned on a recent video, one time I even took the bowl with me to my sister's house so I could stretch it and fold it, even though I had plans already to go to her house. So it's flexible. You can work with it. And at least during the weekdays, Monday through Thursday, when we're mostly home, we don't have a whole lot of plans, so we can get our school done, get our work done with our business. We're home. And so I at least try to keep bread going those days. And then the extra loaves that we might have can carry us through Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then usually Monday in the morning, I'm getting that starter out of the fridge, feeding it, and then starting up a batch of bread. So we don't even have bread Monday, but I get that process started so that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm kind of in the sourdough routine, the sourdough swing. And then if I've done that, we have fresh bread through the weekend as well, or some left over to make into some of those other wonderful things like French toast and some of the other things that I mentioned. Today for lunch dessert, my daughter made some magic shell. We make ice cream all the time. It's just because we have a dairy cow, it seems like the appropriate thing to do, right? So for the magic shell, this has been her move lately. She mixes up coconut oil and chocolate chips in a double boiler, and then we put it over top our ice cream and it hardens on top. It's really good. So a lot of times if we have leftover ice cream in the fridge, she wants to make something. I'm like, just make an ice cream topping. So she's done caramel, she's done magic shell. Our latest trick that we've been doing for all of our ice cream is adding in ricotta. We have a ton of ricotta cheese from making mozzarella. It doesn't really change the flavor of the ice cream in any way, but it does just make it so much creamier. Afternoons for me always consist of a coffee break, and then it's back to a few more stretch and folds for the bread throughout the afternoon. And then this is when I usually get some computer time. So whether that be a podcast interview for my podcast, Simple Farmhouse Life, or answering emails or updating blog posts, it can vary significantly based on the project I'm currently working on. During this afternoon break, I want to share with you some pieces that I found that I think are just going to be perfect for this upcoming cooler weather season on Walmart. Walmart recently had a bunch of their collections like No Boundaries, Time and True, Free Assembly, launch their fall collections, everything from basics like sweaters, jeans, hoodies, footwear, accessories. I put together several collections. I will leave all the links below to these collections. Affordable pieces that are classic staples that I plan to wear all through this fall season. So I picked up some pieces from Free Assembly. I grabbed a couple of basic sweaters that have a nice shape. I also grabbed a pair of the Free Assembly high-waisted jeans. And then I ordered these cargo style pants from No Boundaries. And I really like them because they're comfortable. So they're elastic, which works really well in this postpartum season of life for me. They also go really nicely with the sweater from the Free Assembly collection. But then I also find myself wearing them oftentimes with a tank top on those hot days. We're still getting a lot of hot days. Some days are cooler. I like that these are transitioning me very well. And then these Time and True ballet flats are something really easy to slip on, to run out very quickly. They look really cute with these wider leg cargo pants. So many great finds over on Walmart. So I will leave links down in the description box below with some of the collections I put together if you are looking to add some staples to your fall collection this season. This little toddler goes down for nap during that work time, and then a lot of the kids either play outside or finish up on their school. We planted so many peppers this year, and each day we're bringing in more. One of my go-tos, of course, this is like the most obvious thing you can think of when it comes to peppers, but it is really good and it's something that's really easy, is stuffed peppers. Now, a friend of mine told me that for her family, we were sitting together at the pool the other day on the last day it was open, Labor Day, and I was telling her that I was going to be making stuffed peppers for dinner. I think this was a different day than this. Anyways, she said that she always makes a stuffed pepper skillet. So since her kids don't like to bite into a big pepper, she instead just takes all of the ingredients that you would normally put in a stuffed pepper, but then saute the peppers diced up with the skillet and then top it with the cheese that you'd otherwise just put on top of it. So I thought that was a pretty good idea. My kids will eat the peppers, but the younger ones, I have to actually like take a forkful of it and feed it to them, but they don't really know what to do with it whenever it's just the whole pepper. So to make it, I cut the peppers in half, scoop out the seeds, drizzle it with olive oil and salt, and then cook that in the oven so that they can get nice and soft while I'm preparing the filling. So for this recipe, you don't really have to do much oven time. After the peppers cook, you just need to fill it and let the cheese melt because the filling is already made. So it comes together very quick. For the filling, I'm doing 2 pounds of ground beef, a couple of onions, some garlic powder, getting that all in my cast iron skillet and cooking it until the onions are nice and soft and the beef is cooked through. I like to do fresh garlic, but I was just feeling lazy today. I was like, let's get this done fast. I also had some leftover rice, so I knew it would be really quick because normally I'd be cooking rice as well. I also grabbed the rest of my freeze-dried tomatoes from the pantry. I showed these in a recent video and I shared with you that I kind of noticed after we got them in the jar, they were still a little bit moist, so I shouldn't have pulled them out of the freeze dryer. So I'm just using them up as opposed to keeping them until, all winter long like you could with freeze dried stuff. And next time I have a few things I want to do. I want to blend them up before putting them on the tray so that they're already crushed up in a sense, as opposed to just using my hands to do it, which turned some of them a little bit gummy because they weren't quite dry. Also a little extra dry time. and then package them with an oxygen absorber so that they can keep longer. So whenever I'm making something like this, I just taste a lot along the way, add some seasoning. So in this case, I did an Italian seasoning. Then I also had an unmarked, unnamed seasoning blend that I don't remember even where it came from, but it tasted really great in it. And then I just keep tasting it until it has enough salt. After the peppers are soft, I fill up the peppers with the mixture. It's like there was a time in my life whenever I added eggs to this and feta cheese. So I probably need to go back to that, because if I remember correctly, that was really delicious, and it also made the filling come together more. One thing I will warn you though, if you do it that way, for me, I always have a lot of leftover filling, and some of the kids, when they're done eating their pepper, like to get more of just the filling. So of course, if it has eggs in it, it really is only good to be filled into something. So you could use it in the future for more stuffed peppers, or maybe some kind of casserole that you bake. But once you have the egg in there, it's just not the best. I mean, you could still just eat the filling, but you'd rather it not be in there for that. Another option, of course, would be just to put the egg in half of the filling. Today, I didn't do any of that, but as I'm thinking through, I remember that is how I used to do stuffed peppers, but I didn't have any feta on hand, and I definitely could have done the eggs. We, of course, top this with my cumin spice cheese that I'm trying to use up. And then Luke and I are getting more of those peppers into the freeze dryer. We have so many now. And I know that all winter and fall, it's going to be so easy to just take a handful of freeze-dried peppers, throw it in my soup, throw it in my chili, no chopping involved. They'll reconstitute in the broth. I know that's going to be a really nice way to have them preserved all through this next cold season. For the homemaker, there are always a few tasks to do before bed, whether this is finishing up the daily bread to get it in the fridge to bake for the next day, or cleaning a few things. I like to call it the mom clean. Most nights, I take a couple little kids upstairs to read to them, put their jammies on, brush their teeth. Luke takes a couple kids upstairs, and then the big kids, usually the top 3 at this point, fully clean the kitchen. But there's always a few things I come in and just want to wipe out the sink, maybe clean the little trays on top of the burners on my stove, wipe down the front of the cabinets. My favorite finishing touch in the kitchen is to wipe down my quartz counters with a really wet rag and then go through with a dry one and polish them. The kitchen feels closed and ready for the next day. This final phase, well, final if you don't count the baking part, of the sourdough bread baking involves shaping it, giving it some tension against the countertop to increase and improve oven spring, putting it in floured bannetons, then in plastic and in the fridge for the night. I can bake it tomorrow or the next day. Once it's in there, fresh bread is but an hour away. So anytime we want it, we can have it. Thanks for joining me for a day in my farmhouse kitchen, doing all the regular things that happen repetitively, but also it's such a blessing to be able to serve my family in this way. Thank you so much for stopping by our farmhouse.